Monica Charette, and this is Holding the Light.
As long as you love, I will whisper in your ear, little whispers you will hear. As long as you love.
Today's episode is a tough one. We're sitting down with Aiden, who at just 12 years old lost his brother Austin to an accidental drug overdose. 10 years later, he wants to share his experiences, the grief, sometimes anger, the stigma surrounding his passing, but always the deep love that remains. He talks about family and addiction, finding his way forward after loss, and bravely honoring both his brother and his grief journey. So much to learn from both Aiden and Colby as we hold the light today with Aiden Deans. Aiden, I want to start by saying how incredibly honored and even more so how proud I am of you for reaching out to me to share your story. I think it's such a courageous thing you are doing at such a young age. You're here today to talk about the loss of your older stepbrother, Austin, 9 years ago to an accidental drug overdose. And we had your mom, Janice, as a guest on our podcast earlier this spring. What made you want to reach out to us? Why are you telling your story here today?
So he was my half brother, and I feel like people don't understand the meaning. At least what overshadows his death is how he died, and that he was gay or it was drug overdose. Like that kind of is what defines his death. And I don't think that I don't view it that way, and I don't think a lot of other people should view it that way either. It means a lot more to me and my family than that. So, I just feel like I have things that I could maybe offer to the conversation around, losing a sibling, and kind of being around the family and experiencing that and handling and processing that grief together. I just feel like I could add something,
So how old were you when he passed away?
I was 12 years old.
12. And how old are you now?
I am 21. I'm almost 22.
That's right. Tell us about your relationship with your brother, Austin.
He, as you know, he spent a lot of time with his dad over at his dad's house growing up, so I didn't get to see him a lot, but whenever I did, he was always like super happy and super joyous. He was super funny, and we would constantly mess with each other, me and my both of my older brothers, my brother Jackson. We'd go outside and play. One thing that we loved to do was look for garter snakes. So we'd go around the property and look for garter snakes, and because he loved animals, he loved nature. So, there was just a lot of good times between all three of us whenever he would come around. So we knew that when he was going to be home, that it was going to be a good couple days. It was always good seeing him.
So Austin suffered from mental health and substance abuse disorder, and so you were quite young, as you said. Were you aware of his struggles at all?
Not particularly. I knew that he had some mental health problems, and I mean that's not uncommon from like the rest of us. I've also grew up and still deal with anxiety and depression, major depressive disorder. So we could relate to each other that way. So I knew that he was institutionalized, but when it came to any dependency problems, I wasn't aware. I was too young, I think. It just wasn't something that I think my mom wanted to share with us quite yet, and so it was just like I wanted to be there more for my brother, but he wasn't around. He was, and at this point, he was more grown up and he was away from home. So, you know, it was rough, but I felt like we had each other, you know?
In our interview with your mother, sorry to pivot so heavily, but she had mentioned that Austin was sexually abused by a relative and resulted in behavioral changes. And obviously, you've just shared that Austin was gay, which impacted friendships. She described your brother as the most wonderful and caring person, but also, kind of dealing with that aspect of his life created almost like a different version of himself. Or is that even appropriate? How would you describe Austin?
When it came to all that stuff, um, I agree with my mom. I think that it was infectious. And I think that was what fed like the darker parts of himself. One thing that I see a lot is when it comes to siblings who've lost siblings is, and even beyond that, just family losing family, is there's this level of anger in the grief process. There's still days where I'm a little mad at Austin. I kind of wish that he just like talked to us and reached out. I kind of wish that I had that opportunity to talk to him, or that somebody else in the family could have talked to him, or a friend. Because I've never experienced something like that, but I know plenty of people who have, and I know how awful that is. And I just hate that he had to deal with that almost alone. So that's the more painful part, but it angers me because I just wish he talked to us, um, because there was all this really good side of Austin. I'm glad that a lot of people got to see versus the part of Austin that was in pain, you know.
Totally understand.
Tell us about the day that Austin died. What happened? And, like, where were you? And do you remember receiving the news?
So I remember it super clearly. I was in seventh grade, and my great grandfather, for a very long time, up to a year or two ago, drove the school buses, one of the school buses for my school. And Jackson, my older brother, was at a doctor's appointment, so it was just me and my little brother at school. And we were told to go on my great grandfather's bus and that we were going to go home with him. That felt kind of weird, but I figured maybe my parents had something else to do, or they were going to be away for a while. That was fine. And while we were waiting at my great grandparents' house, we were there for an hour or two. I was doing homework and I asked my great grandmother what we were doing there, or like what the parents were up to, and she kept telling us they were grocery shopping. And that's when I knew that something was wrong, because I mean my parents grocery shop all the time, and I was also old enough to watch my little brother at the time, so I knew something was wrong. And then my dad walked in. This was one of three times I've ever seen him in tears. He hugged my great grandmother and he took me out to the porch. He sat me down, and that's when he told me that Austin had passed. And it was just kind of like a super big shock because, like I said, I wasn't aware of any of his dependency issues. So it was just kind of like super out of nowhere. I cried for a couple hours, and then I completely shut down. So I went complete, like, objective based frame of mind. Like every decision that I make from here on is to make my life for my parents as easy as possible. I went back to school. I went for straight A's. Straight A's. I tried every extracurricular, um, and did everything in my power to make everybody around me happier, or that I wasn't any kind of responsibility or burden. Growing up and having like my blow up moment and processing everything, I've realized now that that wasn't the best choice. I've learned a lot from that. So the day that he passed, I always kind of viewed as this part of me that kind of shut down a little bit. Um, and I've been working really hard to get that back. So that's what that was like for me.
I mean, I can't even begin to tell you the parallels that I've experienced. Like when we were in the hospital and got the news that it was obvious that, Cassidy was going to die, I just remember like screaming at nothing. And then within 5 minutes, I'm gathering mom and dad up and telling them, like, because I just finished geometry, in eighth grade. And so I was like, a triangle is actually the strongest shape. Like, geometrically, it's the strongest shape. And we're a triangle now. We used to be a square. And we have to understand this new normal, but we're still strong. And, like, every aspect after that is so similar to you, where I think, you lose a little bit of yourself in the effort to heal, like, the people around you, your parents, and the people that provide for you. It's, I totally understand what you're saying.
I just wanted to preface, that I don't think that that was my parents' fault at all either. I want to add
Right.
that, right? I
Oh,
don't want
absolutely.
I think they did the absolute best they could, I'd never seen my mom like that before. And my dad, similar to me, also kind of went into this like objective based, like, needing to take care of my mom and needing to take care of us. And there was this dynamic in the house, and the relationship between everybody very suddenly changed. I love both my parents very, very much. And I don't know if they feel like it today, if they feel like it now, but um, every little thing that they did meant a lot. And, and it made a big difference. So, it was just, I felt like I had to do something. I felt like I
Right.
needed to be better for them, you know?
Yeah, and like you said, I mean, that sometimes that comes at a cost, and I feel the exact same way. Where in no way, shape, or form do I ever feel like my parents could have done anything more. I mean,
Mhm.
I think you can understand too that like child loss is so different than sibling loss. There's no way to compare the two. They're both awful, but seeing our parents go through that is just, I mean, it's gut wrenching emotionally and mentally, and at times even physically. Like, these are the people you care most for. And I totally understand that perspective. I mean, what was it like for you to have to watch your parents go through that?
God, I mean, most of that was a blur for me now. Um, but I remember seeing my mom was couch bound for a while. I mean, she was pretty debilitated for a while and just not doing well at all. And nobody wants to see anybody they care about, anybody they love, to feel that way. Um, and then like in comparison to my dad, you know, seeing him trying so hard to pick up the pieces and keep everybody together and make sure that the bills were paid and make sure that everybody was fed. Um, it was like seeing everybody, seeing the two people that I love and care about the most try so hard probably one of the worst times of their entire life, and just seeing the effort and the trial and the tribulations that they went through. um I never want to see something like that again, and I think that's what motivated me to do the things that I was doing. um yeah, it was extremely painful. It was extremely painful to see my parents that way, let alone my siblings.
I know, right? I mean, fortunately, I didn't have to see that side of grief because, there I was. This is an interesting question, but like, as you returned to your version of your new normal, um, was it hard to like talk to your peers about what had happened and your loss, like returning to school and normal life? Did you feel like people maybe just saw past you, or did you feel like maybe it was more difficult to reach out to those individuals because there's a lot of growing that happens through grief? I feel like you almost
Yes.
step into this adult role. And so I would like you to reflect on what it was like kind of returning to the real world after all of this.
So, I mean, growing up even before Austin's passing wasn't exactly super easy for me. I mean, I was already growing up pretty quickly, but then after Austin's passing, it was like tenfold. And I already had a hard time connecting with my peers, but now, even though I was already struggling to be normal and to be accepted by my classmates and people my age, um, I was trying even harder, right? And word travels fast, so I was trying not to, I didn't want to talk to anybody about it because I wanted to be normal. I didn't want anybody to know about it. There was always the question too, and this is it was, you always get asked like how many siblings you have or whatever, like I'd say that I have five siblings, and it was always like, in grieving, I didn't know how to answer that question, but I always stuck to five. I always said that I had five siblings. That I only told a couple people. I told my closest friends, um, and I'm forever grateful to them that I was able to talk to them about that. To have somebody, to have some kind of outlet to talk to anybody about it was extremely helpful. But I always, that just kind of, my feeling of outcast grew so much more after that happened. So navigating that and getting through that, and also feeling, having the feeling of belonging or some kind of path, um, was hard to find. But you know, I think I found it. So it took me a minute, but I got there.
And that you have. And so I'm sorry again if I'm misspeaking, but as I understand it from your mother, you also struggle with depression. And you shared that you've had suicidal ideation in the past and were hospitalized at one point. Can you, share a little bit of that with us right now and how that experience was for you?
It was about 3 or 4 years later when I kind of had, like, it was like freshman and sophomore year of high school where I started experiencing more panic attacks, and I was more stressed out, and I started to have, experience more suicidal thoughts more frequently. Um, and it all kind of led up to this one night where I had this extremely bad panic attack, and my older brother Jackson had to break my door down to get to me because he was worried about me. When my parents got home, they took me to the hospital, um, and I almost wound up at Acadia Hospital. That's when I started going to therapy, and that's when I started um, this really long process of it was, and I'm still doing it today, right? That's the important part, is this is kind of a process that's gonna take most of my life. I remember it was specifically the summer after I graduated high school. There's the river walk that I lived near. I would sit there for 2 hours at a time, and I would reflect on situations where I would spiral, or I would, that would trigger certain, my depression in a certain way. Um, and because my dad always taught me self-reflection. My dad was, sorry,
Take your time.
I don't think he knows um, how important some of the conversations that him and I had were. Um, and now they influence me now and the decisions that I make. He always taught me self-reflection, right? So I would self-reflect, and I would think on that time where, why did I react that way? What specifically happened? You know, what did I do wrong? What could I do better next time to this day, I still experience depression. Yeah, everybody has bad days, but mine's connected to something, right? Mine's connected to my experiences as well as my mental health. I feel like I've come such a long way, and I've found things that I'm genuinely interested in, and I have passions that I genuinely follow, and also going through the experience of losing Austin showed me like I couldn't do that to my parents either, right? I experienced what that was like for my parents, and so I knew that I couldn't do that to them again, right? So that kept me going as well. I couldn't hurt my mom. Um, I couldn't hurt my dad. I couldn't hurt the rest of my siblings. So it's just been this really long and really difficult journey of accepting the bad parts of me and acknowledging that there's things that I need to work on and changes that I need to make. So when I look at myself from 5 years ago, I don't like who I was, right? Um, and I think that's a good thing. I think that I can say that proves that I like myself better now, right? And there's only up from here, I think.
Yeah, and it's so wonderful that you had that relationship with your father. And by no way in me saying this am I disparaging my own, but I feel like, especially with my peers or even adults that are men, they have such a hard time doing exactly what you're doing, which is just self reflecting and being able to cry and being able to go to therapy and to talk about these things. I'm fortunate enough now to live with somebody who's a widower and speaks so highly about his wife who passed, and being able to cry and to share that. And it's like just so foreign to me sometimes, because I think similar to yourself, or initially, I think a lot of men in particular, for some reason, whether it be social conditioning or X, Y, or Z reason, they try to just overanalyze and get back to business and status quo and not just experience these things. Like, yeah, I had a conversation with him this morning, and it's like I wish I could cry more, because that meant I would have loved more time with Cassidy. Like every single second is something to cry over because it was that perfect and that worth it. Just more time.
I can't remember who said it. It was Andrew Garfield that said it. He recently lost his mom, and he went on with I think Elmo or something, and talked about his process of losing his mom. He talked about the sadness that he's experiencing in that, and he said um, that it's almost it's as much as it's hard to experience sadness and to feel that loss. It's also a good thing because it shows him how much he loved her,
Mm-hmm.
and that he got to experience that and be a participant in that. Um, that's the beautiful thing about 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 that, and it's hard too because to with your point with like how men kind of deal with uh, those types of emotions. It's just men by default when they feel a vulnerable emotion, they go to anger or anything else, right? There's this masking that's done, and I think that's really unfortunate. Um, and I always thought, at least for me, I need to feel these things because I used to
Mm-hmm.
not. I used to not feel these things and acknowledge these things, and all it did was hurt myself and people around me. Um, and I hope that if anybody listens to this, somebody who has gone through the same thing, um, if there's one thing I could say, really, or like there's multiple things I could say, but one of the big things is to not be afraid to talk about it, because having a healthy relationship with yourself and having a healthy relationship with people around you means that you need to feel those things and accept those things. And I don't know, but to me that seems manly. That seems like a good thing to do.
Exactly, I
So,
agree. Speaking of sort of like stigmas in general, um, obviously there's a massive one surrounding drug overdose, to the point where like it almost seems as humanity loses its empathy for families and loved ones who have experienced this loss, casting blame, even on a child's death. Did you experience that stigma, and how did it affect you?
I did deal with that a little bit, and it was mostly because my mom dealt with that, right? And I also see it a lot online, and with upon recent events with the whole Narcan situation. It's extremely frustrating. There's so much misinformation and so much hatred around the idea of drug overdose. I see so many people make blanket statements like, you know, saying like that their family should have cared more, or that he was weak anyways, and like this was supposed to happen, and things like that, and they all talk about their tax dollars like that has anything to do with my brother's life. Like, as I would, if I could spend every single penny that I have and more to have been able to, not even just for Austin but for anybody else, right? Like, I would
Mm-hmm.
I would spend that money to save that life, you know what I mean? And it's just like, it's
Right.
so insensitive and misguided. Yeah, so when I see that being weaponized against my family, and it's extremely frustrating. There's also a lot of that misinformation around it. So thankfully I didn't have to deal with it firsthand. It was just a lot of, things that I would see online and things that people would say to my mom online. Um I don't know how I would have dealt with that if somebody were to come to me and say that to me. I don't know how I would have responded to that, and I don't want to know.
I think like for me too, like I had some interactions where, individuals would say some pretty rude or disrespectful things, and in all honesty, the way I walked away from it was just kind of like, well, that's their loss because they didn't know Cassidy, you know, and you
Mhm.
got to know the things that made Austin so special.
Right. And when it comes to losing somebody to drug overdose, that's the way that, other than just being like an empathetic person and being informed, that's the only way that you truly understand like what this means, right? And what this
Right.
problem is. For somebody to talk about the situation so ignorantly, I will always be glad that they hadn't experienced it, though. You know what I mean? But that doesn't make it not frustrating. Um, and I agree with you, right? If they knew Austin better, if they knew him other than a statistic on some graph, you know what I mean? Yeah, I think they would think differently.
Right. I know. I think it's so important that people just understand, like, that addiction and drug rehabilitation is just healthcare, like anything else.
Well, first, I've studied psychology and I've studied social science.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I worked at Acadia Hospital for a time, and now I work in a funeral home. I have researched a lot of the problem, the societal issues that feed everything else, right? I've worked with those who are dealing with mental crisis and mental health issues, and now I see grieving families. I help those who are experiencing the exact same thing that I did.
Hold on, that's so fascinating to me. I just need to ask you, how did you get involved in that, and I don't know how you separate your grief when you're watching other people experience the same thing.
I think there's a part of me that really thinks that the good parts of Austin would want me to take this experience and do something good with it. I've gone through a decent amount of stuff in my life besides Austin. I've experienced loss there's so many ways that you could take those experiences and have, and perceive them and interpret them and apply them to your life. It's so easy to go through so many awful things and just kind of give up or kind of give in to those negative feelings, and that's really sad. That's really unfortunate. But you can also take that and do something with it. Just for me personally, there has to be something good that comes out of this. I want to provide something to people. I want to help people for, using what I've learned. When I was working at Acadia, because I dealt with the teenagers, I was thinking, what were things that I really needed to hear when I was going through the exact same things that they were? I wanted to give them that, right? And when it comes to the funeral home, I wanted to make this process for them as comfortable and as lifting as possibly can be, and if that means attending the funeral and making sure that everybody's comfortable and everybody has tissues, or if that means I show up and I take their child into my care, I want to provide that service for them. Um, and I think Austin would want me to do that. You know what I mean? And to do something with it. You know, and that honestly is a big reason why I'm getting into the funeral service industry. Is for Austin and for me.
That's so
You know.
amazing. Yeah. I always say I'm living for two of us now. It's not just my degree, it's Cassidy's degree or anything I do. It's always like, well, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for her.
Mhm.
So I have a good question because obviously, I sometimes joke that now I'm an only sibling. But how do you think like grief is displayed, how it shows up for somebody your age? I mean, compared to others like older adults. I mean, I never got to observe things like that. I mean, obviously I did in the immediate aftermath, but not to the same degree that I was experiencing. And obviously you had other siblings. I'm just curious how you compare that, what you observed from them compared to your parents' experiences.
I think my siblings and I think all of our experiences were vastly different. I think about it often how different our lives would be and how different our relationships would be if we didn't lose Austin. Because I feel like ever since then, there's been this drift apart from me and all my siblings. And I mean, I still have a pretty decent relationship with all of them, but I only really talk to both of my older and my younger brother. I don't want to get too far into their experience because that's their experience, and I really don't know what exactly they felt. But what I observed is kind of similar to my circumstance, where I think we all kind of felt like this shared pressure or idea that we needed to be a certain way for our parents, um, because they were struggling, right? Um, and we all kind of blew up in different ways. For me, it was what I just told you about, the night where I had a panic attack and I went to the hospital and I went through treatment. Um, but for some of my other siblings, it showed up differently. I'm a very emotionally transparent person, which I don't think is a weakness. It's just who I am. But I don't think my siblings, at least some of them, are very emotionally transparent. It's harder to get things out of some of them. So it was a lot of observation. It was a lot of paying attention, to certain behaviors and certain actions and reactions, where I could kind of gauge where my siblings were, and then it turned to trying to figure out what I could do to help them, um, which was hard, right? Because I could try my best, but I think my siblings just didn't. I wasn't like the solution to their problem. and also when it came to not just my siblings, but other people my age, so my classmates. When I was a junior, somebody in the senior class, he died in a car accident, and he was really well known and well liked through the whole school. And I didn't know him that well, but he was good friends with my brother, and he was good friends with a lot of other people in my class. And I interacted with him before, and he was a really nice guy, and it was really awful news. There was this one kid in my class who was usually pretty goofy. He was pretty silly. He was telling a lot of jokes. He was in my gym class, and after he passed, I noticed that he was acting off. He was acting strange, and I looked back, and he was gone. And so I went into the locker room to see if he went in there, and I found him sobbing and just crying. I just sat with him. I didn't say anything. I just didn't want him to feel like he was alone. And he just looked at me and said, "I just miss him so much. I'm seeing so many people my age experiencing true loss for the very first time and going through the similar hoops and trials of grief and all this disgusting, awful stuff. Um, the things that I have already experienced and am currently experiencing. Call me weird. It was interesting, right, to see everybody's process and to see how everybody kind of processed it in their own way. I didn't think I was different, right? I know, like, my process from everybody else, like when I'm talking about comparing my process to people my age, I never thought that I was different. I just thought that I was unique. I think everybody has a very unique way of processing that, and I learned that a lot working at the funeral home too. It depends on who, what type of family I'm talking to. It's extremely interesting, equally as much as it is gut wrenching to experience and to watch. I cared a lot. I cared a lot about my classmates. I cared a lot about my siblings. So
It's amazing that you found at even such an early stage through your grief process to find ways to turn that into something more purposeful to help others. And I wish that I could have done more of that at that time. I feel like I was just kind of going through it, but I can't imagine that at such a young age you were able to, even though it's not even like overcoming, but carry your grief with you, still helping others. I have a question. Like, this is something that I've thought a lot about moving forward, but you know, when you meet somebody who doesn't know your brother, like, what do you say about him? And if one day you choose to start a family or something, how are you going to communicate and describe Austin to those people?
I would describe Austin as a young man who found something in everything. It was the trees or the grass or everybody, right? He found something in everything to joke about or to love or to, smile about. That's how I want people to learn about Austin. But I also don't want to take away that he was a human being, with human problems, very human problem. When it comes to the human experience, I think Austin has a lot to teach us. Let's say I had children. I would I would tell them all these beautiful stories about their uncle, but I also wouldn't hide things about him either, because he has a lot to teach us. And he has taught me a lot and has influenced me in my growth. There's also things about Austin that I would like to be. I want to be as passionate and as funny and just charming. He was just a great guy to be around. To know that he was struggling as much as he was, but he was still able to make all of us laugh, I think, is probably the most beautiful thing about his life. And that's the one thing that I want to carry on about Austin, and his story.
That's so beautiful. We usually end our podcast by asking you to share how you would like the world to remember your brother, and I feel like you just did that so eloquently. You're so incredibly aware and empathetic and just so kind. It's been such an enlightening interview with you that offers a different perspective, I think, on child loss that we've ever had on our podcast. And I would encourage everyone listening to share this episode with someone today who needs to hear Aiden's words of understanding and hope. And I know your mom is incredibly proud of you right now, because I am too, Aiden. And I'm so confident that Austin is as well. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us today.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for having me. I hope it finds somebody, and I hope that, I know that sometimes my articulation isn't super good, so I hope that there's something that somebody can take from that. And I couldn't be more thankful to my mom and my dad. They both taught me such incredible things, and, I feel like is worth sharing. So I just really hope that, this is helpful to somebody. It was helpful to me. So thank you for the opportunity.
Well, that's why we're here, so thank you.
As long as you love.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this podcast helpful, please share our link with others and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. I'm Monica Charette, reminding you that you are never alone in your grief. Until next time, we'll be right here with you, holding the light.
As long as you love.